hand pressed a doorbell on a modest brick house. No answer. The man stepped back and looked at the house, and then at the address on his phone, and then at the house again, the particular look of someone confirming that they are in the right place and encountering the wrong response. He was 46 years old, and he was wearing clothes that had been expensive recently and were beginning to show the stress of a period in which replacement had not been possible. And he stood on the front step of his mother's house on Clement Street and waited for a door that did not open. He looked at the house next door. On the porch, an elderly man sat in one of two matching rocking chairs with a brown accordion folder on the small table beside him. The man was not reading. He was not rocking. He was simply present in the particular way of someone who has been sitting on the same porch for 30 years and has developed the quality of stillness that belongs to people who understand that the street tells you what you need to know if you pay attention to it. Raymond Delaney looked at Marcus Whitfield standing on Agnes's front step. He did not stand. He did not wave. He reached over to the table and picked up the accordion folder and set it on his lap. Marcus hadn't been on this street in 5 years. He had not come for Christmas or for his mother's surgery or for the birthday she had celebrated with Raymond and Mrs. Okafor from across the street and the tea she made at the same time every morning because routine was what held a life together when other things did not. He was not here because he had remembered to come. He was here because the man on that porch was the last option he had left. The Whitmore family had been gracious in the way of people who are removing themselves from a situation, which is to say, they had been impeccably polite and had communicated through attorneys and had not returned the calls that Marcus had made in the weeks after the business collapsed and the life he had built inside their circle had begun its quiet dissolution. He had called his mother twice in those weeks. She had answered both times. She had listened. She had said, "Come home, Marcus." He had not come. And then the third call had not been to his mother. It had been to Raymond. Raymond stood now slowly with the folder in his hand, and Agnes appeared in the doorway behind him, holding 2 cups of tea, which she had made because she had seen Marcus's car turn onto Clement Street from the kitchen window and had understood that the morning was going to require tea. Raymond said, "I've been expecting you, Marcus." Not like this. "But I've been expecting you." Marcus stood on his mother's front step and looked at the man who had lived next door, his entire childhood, the man who had been at every graduation and every crisis and every ordinary Tuesday that Marcus had not been present for, and he understood from the way Raymond was holding the folder that the folder contained something he did not yet know about, and that it was the reason Raymond had been expecting him. That folder had been on the table between the 2 rocking chairs for 30 years. Inside it was the architecture of a life Marcus thought he had built himself. Every document in it had his mother's name somewhere on it, and every one of them had been paid for by the man standing on the porch holding it. Agnes crossed the strip of grass between the 2 houses at 6:45, which was when she always crossed it, which was when the dew was still on the grass, and the street had the particular quality of a neighborhood that was waking up rather than awake, the sounds of it distant and unhurried. She carried a cup in each hand, the blue one for herself and the green one for Raymond, which had been his cup for 22 years, and which she washed each evening and set beside her own on the counter so they would be ready in the morning. She walked carefully across the grass, not because she was unsteady, but because the cups were full and she had never seen the point of spilling something that didn't need to be spilled. Raymond was already in his chair. He was always already in his chair, which was one of the things Agnes had come to understand about Raymond Delaney over 22 years of mornings that he arrived before she did, and waited with the patience of a man for whom waiting was not an imposition, but simply the first part of the day. He was 76 years old, and he had the unhurried quality of someone who had spent decades making careful decisions and had arrived at a place where care and patience were the same thing. She handed him the green cup without a word. He took it without a word. They sat and watched the street begin. Mrs. Okafor came out of her house across the way at 7, as she always did, to collect her newspaper from the front walk, and she looked up and waved with the wave of a woman who has been waving at the same 2 people from the same front walk for many years and finds genuine pleasure in the continuity of it. Raymond waved back, Agnes called out her name and asked about her hip, and Mrs. Okafor said it was better than yesterday, which was better than the day before, and Agnes said good and meant it. Raymond set his cup on the arm of the chair and reached down beside him and picked up the accordion folder. It was brown thick, the kind of folder that had been made to hold a significant quantity of documents and had been fulfilling that purpose for long enough that the leather had gone soft at the corners, and the elastic closure had been replaced twice. He set it on the small table between the chairs with the deliberate placement of someone putting something in its correct position, then picked up his cup again. Agnes looked at the folder on the table. She did not ask about it. She had never asked about it. Not in the years it had been appearing on that table, not in the conversations they had shared on this porch through 22 summers and winters and the ordinary Tuesday mornings that make up most of a life. The folder was Raymond's, and Raymond's business was Raymond's business, and Agnes had learned long ago, first from her late husband Henry, and then from the simple evidence of Raymond himself, that there were people in the world who showed up and did what was needed and did not require you to ask about the mechanics of their showing up. She trusted Raymond the way she trusted the morning, which was completely and without requiring explanation. Through the front window of her house, if you sat in the right chair at the right angle, which both of them could from the porch, Marcus's college diploma was visible above the fireplace. The frame was the dark wood one Agnes had bought the week it arrived. The week Marcus graduated, the week she had stood in the gymnasium in her good dress and watched her son cross the stage and felt the specific pride of a woman who had worked for something and seen it become real. She had not taken it down. Raymond glanced at it. It was a brief glance, the kind that was not casual, but had been made to look casual, and Agnes noted it the way she noted most things without comment, filing it in the part of her understanding that she returned to later when she had more information. She said he hasn't called in 14 months. She said it the way she said most difficult things, without the weight of self-pity in it, as a fact she had accepted and was reporting rather than a wound she was displaying. The last call had been brief, and she had understood from the brevity of it that he was calling from obligation rather than want, and she had been kind during it, and had not made it harder than it was, and had hung up and made her tea and gone to bed. Raymond nodded. He already knew. He knew most things about what happened on this street and in Agnes's life because he paid attention, and because paying attention was what he had been doing in one form or another for 30 years. He said, "The folder's getting heavy, Agnes." She said, "Then stop adding to it, Raymond." He said, "Can't stop. Not yet." She looked at him, and he looked at the street, and the morning continued around them, the way mornings continued, with the ordinary motions of a neighborhood that had no idea it was the setting for something that had been building for 3 decades. Agnes was not waiting for Marcus to come back out of love. She had given that freely years ago without condition or accounting, and it had not been returned in the way she had given it. She had made her peace with that in the way that practical women make peace with things that cannot be changed, which is to continue doing what needs doing and trust that the story would find its ending. She was simply a woman who knew how stories ended, and she was patient enough to sit on the porch until this one did. Agnes found the birthday card at the bottom of the second drawer of the hall dresser, which was the drawer where she kept things that did not have a more specific home but were too significant to throw away. She had been folding laundry on the bed and had run out of space and had gone to the drawer for room and found it there under a church bulletin from 2019 and a thank you note from a patient's family that she had received the year she retired and had kept because the words in it were the kind of words you kept. The card was from 15 years ago. She recognized it before she opened it, the particular blue of the envelope and the handwriting on the front, the MOM of it in Marcus's hand from that period, before his signature had changed into the more compressed and efficient version he used now. She opened it and read it. It was a good card. He had written inside it in the way he had written before the Whitmore years, with the warmth that came naturally to him when he was not managing his presentation, telling her about a patient she had mentioned on the phone, whose name he had remembered asking about Raymond, saying he would try to get home in the fall. The handwriting was from a different person. She put the card back in the drawer and closed it gently and went back to the laundry. 12 years ago, Marcus had called on a Tuesday evening to say he was engaged. Agnes had been in the kitchen making soup, and she had turned off the burner and sat down at the table and listened to him describe Claudette with the specific happiness of a man who has found something he had not known he was looking for. She had liked Claudette's voice when Marcus put her on the speakerphone, the directness of it, and the way she laughed at something Marcus said. And after the call, Agnes had taken the soup off the stove entirely and baked a small cake instead because the occasion seemed to require something celebratory, and she was alone, and the cake was for her. She had eaten 2 pieces and called Raymond across the yard to eat the rest. The Whitmore family was old money in the way that meant it had been present long enough to have opinions about things that new money had not yet formed opinions about. Agnes met them at a dinner 6 months before the wedding in a restaurant she had dressed carefully for, and Claudette's mother had been impeccably gracious in the way of a woman who had been raised to be gracious in all circumstances, which was different from being warm. She had asked Agnes about her work, and Agnes had told her about the pediatric ward, and Claudette's mother had said how rewarding that must have been and had turned to speak to someone else. Later at the same dinner, while Marcus was across the room, Claudette's mother had said to her sister within Agnes's hearing something about Marcus's background that Agnes had heard clearly and had chosen in the moment to file under information received rather than grievance sustained. At the wedding, Agnes had been seated at a table near the side entrance of the reception hall with 2 of Claudette's distant cousins and a colleague of Marcus's she had not met before. The family table was at the center of the room. Marcus had come to her table twice during the evening, and both times he had been warm, and both times she had told him to go enjoy his reception, and she had meant it, and also understood without requiring it to be stated what the seating arrangement communicated. Raymond had asked her about the wedding the next morning on the porch. She had said it was beautiful, which it was, and that Marcus had looked happy, which he had, and Raymond had nodded, and that evening she had seen through his window that he was at his kitchen table with a folder open and a pen in his hand. The erasures came in the small increments that erasures always came in each one, defensible on its own terms, each one following, logically from the one before, none of them large enough to constitute a decision, and all of them together, constituting something that could not be undone. Marcus stopped telling stories about Clement Street at dinner parties. Agnes's career in the pediatric ward became, she worked in healthcare. The specific address of his childhood became upstate, which was a word that meant nothing and also meant a great deal. At a charity event 3 years into the marriage, someone had asked Marcus about his parents, and he had said his father passed some years ago, which was true, and that his mother was retired, which was also true, and had changed the subject with the ease of a man who had practiced the change. Agnes heard about this from a nurse she used to work with whose daughter attended the same event. She had sat with it for an evening, and then she had put it in the same place she put the seating arrangement and the phone calls that grew shorter each year, and the pauses in those calls that grew longer, the place she kept things that were true and painful and not changeable by any action she was willing to take. The last Christmas visit had been 4 years ago. Before that, it had been the flights, then Claudette's family, then a silence that had settled over the holiday season like weather. Raymond watched all of it. He watched it from the porch and from his kitchen window and from the particular vantage point of a man who had been on this street since 1989 and had understood what was happening before Agnes had fully articulated it to herself. He did not interfere. He did not offer opinions that had not been requested. He documented, and he kept Agnes company, and he paid the bills when they came due, and she could not meet them, which he did in the quiet way of someone who has decided that the doing is sufficient and the knowing is not required. He didn't erase her in one moment. He did it in 100 small ones, each one easy to justify, each one impossible to take back. The sedan turned onto Clement Street at 10:40 in the morning. It moved slowly, the particular slowness of a car driven by someone who is reading addresses or deciding something, and it came to a stop in front of Agnes's house with the engine still running, which it continued to do for longer than a car engine usually ran when a car had found its destination. The rear panel on the driver's side had a dent not fresh, the dent of something that had happened some weeks ago, and had not been attended to the kind of repair that gets deferred when other things are more pressing. The door opened. Marcus stood on the sidewalk in front of his mother's house and looked at it. He was 46 years old, and he was wearing clothes that had been the right clothes for a different version of his life, the version he had been living 18 months ago, and they fit him the way expensive things fit. When the person wearing them has lost weight, they had not intended to lose. He looked at the brick facade and the front window and the small garden Agnes kept along the front walk, the same garden that had always been there, the same roses she had planted the summer he was 9 years old, and that came back every year with the reliability of things that have been properly established. He looked at it with the expression of a man encountering something he had made himself stop seeing, and is now seeing again with the discomfort of that particular re-encounter. He went to the door and rang the bell. He waited. He checked his phone. He had 4 unread messages from a number he recognized as his attorney's office, and 2 from a number he did not recognize, and 1 from Claudette that he had been reading and rereading for 3 days in the way of a message that contained information requiring decisions he had not yet made. He did not call Agnes's number. He rang the bell again. He stepped back and looked at the house, and then he looked to his left at the porch next door, where Raymond Delaney was sitting in his chair with the brown accordion folder on the table beside him, looking at Marcus with the expression of a man who has been watching a street for 30 years and has seen many things turn onto it and has developed the capacity to read arrivals. Marcus walked to the porch steps. He said Raymond. He said it with the warmth of a man who needs something and has understood on the drive over that warmth is the appropriate opening, the warmth that was genuine once and was now a tool he was using, which was its own kind of information about where he had arrived. Raymond looked at him from the chair. He did not stand. Marcus came up the porch steps and stood at the top of them and looked at Raymond and at the 2 chairs and at the small table between them with the folder on it. His eyes moved across the folder, the way eyes move across things that have no significance, the brief registration and dismissal of an object with no known meaning. He said, "It's good to see you. You look well." Raymond said, "Sit down, Marcus." Marcus sat in the chair that was Agnes's chair, the one on the left, and Raymond watched him settle into it with the alert attention of someone noting a detail. The front door of Raymond's house opened. Agnes came out carrying a cup of tea which she had made when she saw the sedan turn onto the street from the kitchen window which she had been in when she heard the engine slow in the way that engines slow when they are looking for something rather than passing through. She had stood at the window and watched the car stop and watched the door open and watched her son stand on the sidewalk and look at her house, and she had put the kettle on. She came through the door and Marcus turned and saw her. He said, "Mom." He said it the way a person says a word they have not said, in the meaning it was supposed to carry for a very long time, and it came out differently than he had prepared it, softer and less certain, carrying more of what was true than what was managed. Agnes looked at him. She looked at him the way she had looked at children in the pediatric ward for 31 years, with the complete clinical and human attention of someone assessing what was present, and what she saw was tiredness in the specific way that tiredness manifests in a person who has been managing something that was too heavy for too long. She said, "You look tired, Marcus. Sit down. I'll get another cup." She went back inside. No accusation, no reference to 5 years or 14 months or the corner table at the wedding or the charity event where his mother had been reduced to a 1-sentence description. Just an observation and a practical response, which was what Agnes had always offered and which Marcus received now with the expression of a man encountering something he had forgotten was available to him. Raymond moved the folder slightly closer to his own side of the table. It was a small movement. Marcus did not notice it. The audience of this street, which was Raymond himself and Mrs. Okafor, who had appeared briefly at her window across the way, understood it completely. Agnes came back with the 3rd cup and set it on the table near Marcus and sat in Raymond's chair, which Raymond had indicated with a small gesture when she came out, the 2 of them conducting the adjustment without discussion. Marcus said, "Raymond." He said it with the forward lean of a man arriving at the point. He said, "I need to talk to you about something important." He looked at Agnes with the expression of a man who had prepared for a different arrangement. He said privately, if that's all right. Agnes began to stand. Raymond said, Agnes stays Marcus. He said it the way he said things that were not negotiable, which was simply and without elaboration. He said, whatever you need to say, you say it in front of her. Marcus looked at his mother, and his mother looked at the street, and Raymond looked at Marcus with the steady attention of a man who has been waiting for this conversation for 30 years, and is finally having it, and is in no hurry. Marcus said, Raymond, I need your help. Raymond said, I know you do, Marcus. A pause. He said, I've been helping you for 30 years. You just didn't know it. The 3 cups of tea sat on the small table on Raymond's porch, and Marcus held his without drinking it, which Agnes noticed because Agnes noticed the things people did with their hands when they were preparing to say something difficult. The accordion folder was at Raymond's feet below the table, out of the direct line of sight, but present in the way that things are present when they have not been removed. Marcus took a breath. He said, the restaurant group is done. He said it the way people say true things. They have been practicing saying, with the flatness of someone who has said the sentence enough times that the emotion has been pressed out of it, leaving only the fact. 3 locations. Gerald Whitmore put in the initial capital and brought 2 of his partners in on the second round. When the second location started losing money in the 3rd quarter, Gerald withdrew. The partners followed within 2 weeks. He said the bank loan was structured around the Whitmore participation. When they withdrew their guarantees, the bank restructured the terms. I have 30 days before the acceleration clause kicks in. He said Claudette is at her parents' house, she said temporarily. He paused. She hasn't called in 11 days. The porch was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Okafor's door opened across the street, and she came out to water the pot of geraniums on her front step, and she looked over at the 3 of them on Raymond's porch, and she understood in the way of a woman who had lived across from Raymond and Agnes for 22 years that something significant was happening, and she watered her geraniums slowly. Marcus said, I came to you because you know people, Raymond. You were at First Regional for 20 years. You know how these things work on the lending side. I need either a bridge loan from someone who understands the situation or a phone call to someone in your network who could look at the numbers, or failing that, a letter of character I could take to a new investor group that has expressed preliminary interest. Raymond said knows people. He said it quietly, turning the phrase in the way you turn something that has an unexpected texture. He said it again, knows people. He looked at Marcus without adding to it, letting the phrase sit in the October morning air between them. Agnes was watching her son. She was watching him the way she had watched children in the pediatric ward for 31 years, not with the soft attention of someone feeling what the patient felt, but with the precise attention of someone assessing what was actually present, the clinical eye that distinguished between the presenting condition and the underlying one. Marcus was presenting financial distress. What Agnes was reading underneath it was something older and more structural. The distress of a man who had built his identity on a foundation he had not examined and was now standing in the rubble of it without understanding why the foundation had failed. She did not say this. She drank her tea. Marcus said, I know this isn't ideal. I know it's been a while. But this is a temporary situation, and I have a realistic path forward if I can get through the next 60 days. The investor group is serious. I've met with them twice. What I need is credibility, either financial or personal, from someone who carries weight in this community. Raymond said, why did you come to me, Marcus? He said it the way he asked questions without inflection that suggested he already knew the answer, though he did. He said, why not your mother? Marcus looked at Agnes and then at the table. He said, I didn't want to worry her. He said it with the smoothness of a sentence that had been prepared for the question, the sentence that was available when the honest answer was not. Agnes said, you didn't want me to know you needed help, Marcus. She said it the way she said most things, quietly and without the edge that would have made it a confrontation. She said, there's a difference. Marcus looked at his mother. She looked at him, with the same expression she had worn since he came up the porch steps. The expression that was not cold and not warm, but was something more difficult than either, which was accurate. She was seeing him accurately, which was what she had always done, and which he had been for the past 15 years constructing a life that put distance between himself and her accuracy. He said, "I didn't want to involve you in something that might not work out. Agnes said you involved me, Marcus, when you were born. That involvement didn't have conditions on it." The porch was quiet. Marcus looked at the table. He looked at the 3 cups and the small, worn surface of the table that had been on this porch since Agnes could remember, and he looked at the morning light on the front walk, and he looked at his own hands on his knees, the posture of a man sitting in front of something he had been avoiding for a long time and has run out of space to continue avoiding. He said, "I'm asking for your help, Raymond, whatever form that takes. A call, a letter, a loan. I'll put terms on it. I'll pay interest. This is a business request, not a personal one." Raymond looked at him for a long moment. Then he leaned down. He picked up the accordion folder from the floor at his feet. He set it on his lap with the deliberate care of something that had weight to it, not just the physical weight of paper and documents accumulated over 30 years, but the specific weight of a thing that had been kept carefully and was now being brought to the moment it had been kept for. He looked at Marcus. He said, "Before I answer you, I need to show you something." He had come for a phone call or a loan. He was about to receive an education he had been 30 years overdue for. Raymond opened the folder. The smell of it came first, the particular smell of documents that have been kept in a specific place for a long time, old paper, and the faint residue of the bank offices where some of them had originated the smell of careful preservation. The first document was on top, positioned as if it had been placed there intentionally, rather than chronologically, a photocopy slightly faded at the edges, the original date visible in the upper right corner. Raymond took it out and held it for a moment, and then handed it to Marcus without a word. Marcus looked at it. His own name was at the top of the document, his full legal name, Marcus Henry Whitfield, and below it his student loan account number and the terms of the original loan. And at the bottom of the page, on the co-signer line, in the handwriting of a man who had clearly signed many documents over a long career and had developed a signature that was legible and precise, the name Raymond Delaney. The date was September 1997. "Marcus said you co-signed my loans." He said it the way you say something when the information in it is taking longer to process than the sentence itself, looking at the document and at the signature and at the date, which was 4 weeks after his father's funeral. "Raymond said your father died that August, Marcus." He said it the way he said most things, simply, and without elaboration, the facts in their order. "Your mother couldn't qualify as sole co-signer on a nurse's salary with a recently paid funeral and a house mortgage. You were already accepted. You had a full semester starting in 3 weeks. Marcus looked at the signature. "He said I didn't know." Raymond said, "No, you didn't." He reached into the folder. The second document was a letter printed on the letterhead of First Regional Bank, the name of the institution, and Raymond's title below it. Branch manager, the date typed in the upper right corner in the format of formal correspondence, November 1999. Raymond handed it across. It was a letter of recommendation. It was addressed to the hiring director of a mid-sized financial consulting firm, and it recommended in the precise and measured language of a banker who understood that specific language carried specific weight in specific rooms, a recent graduate named Marcus Henry Whitfield, for a position in the firm's analyst program. Marcus read it. Raymond had written, "I have known this young man his entire life. His character is impeccable. His word is his bond. He has the intelligence to learn this work and the integrity to do it correctly. I recommend him without reservation and with the full weight of my professional standing." Marcus read it twice. He remembered getting that job. He remembered receiving the call on a Tuesday afternoon and calling his mother and then celebrating with Claudette, who was then a woman he had been dating for 4 months. He remembered telling the story of landing the job at dinner parties over the years, the story of the resume he had built and the interview he had prepared for, and the way the right preparation met the right opportunity. He had told that story at 100 dinners. He had never known about the letter. He set it on the table beside the co-signature document and looked at both of them, his name on each one, Raymond's name beneath his own on each one, and he had the expression of a man doing arithmetic that is producing a sum he had not expected. Raymond reached into the folder again. The third document was a refinancing agreement, Agnes's mortgage, the house on Clement Street. The original loan had been restructured in 1998, 18 months after Marcus's father died. The terms adjusted to lower the monthly payment to a figure that a nurse working full-time could manage alongside the other costs of keeping a house and raising a teenager. The restructuring had been processed through First Regional Bank. The loan officer of record was Raymond Delaney. Marcus said you restructured her mortgage. Raymond said she couldn't make the original payment and work the hours available to her and keep the house warm and keep you in school. He said it without judgment as a description of an equation that had required solving. The refinancing gave her 11 years to stabilize. By the time the rate adjusted, she could manage it. Marcus said, "How many are there?" Raymond said, "Keep going." Marcus reached into the folder. He found utility receipts from 2008, 3 months of them paid in full, the name on the payment, Raymond Delaney. He found a record of a home repair, the furnace replacement in 2011, the invoice showing the cost, and at the bottom, a notation paid in full by R. Delaney Cash. He found documentation of a small personal loan 2014, the year Agnes's car had needed replacing, the loan structured with terms that no bank would have offered to a retired nurse on a fixed income. Each document landed in the silence of the porch, the way objects land when they are dropped from a height, with a weight that was specific to what they contained. Marcus's voice had gone very quiet. He said, "Was there anything you didn't cover?" Raymond did not answer that question. Marcus went deeper into the folder. He found a hospital receipt. It was from 2019. The hospital name was at the top, and the patient name was Agnes Whitfield. And the procedure was cardiac, the kind of procedure that had a long description in medical language and a short description in plain language, which was that Agnes had needed surgery, and the surgery had happened at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in February, and the bill had been considerable. At the bottom of the receipt, in the box where the payment method was recorded, a stamp, paid in full, R. Delaney. Marcus looked at the stamp. He looked at the date and the amount and the stamp, and he thought about February 2019, which he could locate in his memory as the month of a client dinner in Chicago, and a weekend at the Whitmore House in Connecticut, and a phone that had rung twice from his mother's number, and which he had not answered because he was in a meeting and had told himself he would call back and had not called back. He put the receipt on the table. He did not put it on top of the other documents. He set it to the side, apart the way you set something that requires its own space. Then his hands found something at the back of the folder, not a printed document, not an official form, a piece of paper that was smaller and older than anything else in the folder, folded twice, the paper slightly yellow at the folds. He unfolded it. He recognized the handwriting before he read a single word. He had not seen his father's handwriting in 25 years, and he recognized it immediately, the specific lean of the letters and the way Henry Whitfield had always made his capital letters slightly larger than necessary, as if he had wanted to make sure they were seen. It was a short note, 8 sentences. His father had written, "Raymond, if I go first, I need you to promise me. Agnes won't ask for help. You know how she is. She'll manage until she can't. Watch over them. Marcus is a good boy, but he's going to need someone keeping an eye on the foundation while he builds the house. He won't always know the foundation is there, that's all right. Just make sure it holds. You always were the best of us." Marcus sat on his mother's porch with his father's handwriting in his hands. Raymond said he wrote that the week before he died. He said it quietly in the tone of a man who has kept a confidence for 25 years and is now releasing it to the person it was meant for. He asked me to watch over them. I told him I would. He looked at Marcus. He said I have. The folder was still half full. Marcus closed it. He could not read any more right now. He had built his entire identity on the story of a man who had climbed on his own. Every document in that folder was a chapter of the story he had never been told. The story of who had actually carried him from the month his father died, through every promotion and every dinner party, and every year he had been too busy fitting into the Whitmore world to come back to the street he had been carried from. Raymond reached into the folder one more time. He took out a single sheet and set it on the table and slid it across to Marcus with the deliberate motion of someone placing something exactly where it needs to be placed, no further and no closer. Marcus picked it up. It was a hospital receipt, the kind printed on standard paper with the institution's name at the top, and the patient information in the fields below it, and the itemized costs in a column on the right side, the impersonal efficiency of medical billing applied to the most personal of events. Patient Agnes Marie Whitfield. Procedure cardiac intervention emergency. Date March 14, 2019. Total $22,400. At the bottom of the page in a box meant for payment confirmation, a stamp in red ink. Paid in full, R. Delaney. Marcus read it once. He read it again. He looked at the date and the amount and the stamp, and he looked up from the receipt. He said she had heart surgery. He said it the way you say something when the information in it is still traveling from where it landed to where it needed to reach, looking at Agnes as he said it with the expression of a man whose understanding of a situation is being revised in real time. Agnes looked at her tea. She wrapped both hands around the cup and looked at the tea and did not look at Marcus and did not say anything. Raymond said you were in Aspen, Marcus. You didn't answer the phone. Marcus said I didn't. Raymond said you didn't answer. He said it with the flatness of a man who has been precise about language his entire professional life and is being precise now, stating a fact and only the fact. Your phone was called 4 times between midnight and 2 in the morning. You did not answer. Agnes said Raymond. That's enough. Raymond said no, Agnes. He said it quietly, but there was something underneath the quiet that had not been in his voice all morning, something that had been held in check for a long time and was now at the surface, not loudly, but unmistakably. He said, not today. Today it's enough when I say it's enough. Agnes looked at him. Raymond looked at Marcus. He said Mrs. Okafor drove your mother to the hospital at 2 in the morning. Agnes had called her because there was no one else to call. Mrs. Okafor sat in the waiting room for 6 hours. She was there when the surgeon came out. She was there when Agnes woke up. He paused. I arrived at 4 in the morning when Mrs. Okafor called me. I sat on the other side of the waiting room because there were only 2 chairs and a young couple needed them. He said I paid the bill the following week when it came because your mother's supplemental insurance had a gap, and she didn't tell me about the gap until after the surgery, and I found out when I asked to see the paperwork. Marcus said, why didn't someone... He stopped himself. He put the receipt on the table. He looked at Agnes. Agnes was still looking at her tea. She said, I didn't want to ruin your trip, Marcus. She said it the way she said most things, quietly and without weight on it, as a plain statement of what had been true for her in the moment she had made the decision not to call. She said it, and the porch held it the way the porch held everything, the morning sounds of the street continuing around the sentence as if the sentence had not just accounted for everything. She said, I knew you were happy. I could hear it in your voice the last time we talked. I didn't want to be the thing that interrupted that. Marcus looked at his mother. He looked at her the way he had not looked at her in the years of the Whitmore dinners and the self-made story and the career built on a foundation he had not known existed, which was to say fully without the management of the impression he was making or the identity he was maintaining. He looked at her and he saw a woman who had been alone in a hospital at 2 in the morning with her heart not working correctly and had made the decision from the hospital bed, or from wherever she had made it, that the most important thing was not to interrupt her son's happiness. The Whitmore world was very far away right now. The dinners were very far away. The galas and the Aspen trip and the story of the self-made man and the 100 dinner parties at which he had told it were very far away, receding in the way of things that have been revealed to be built on something other than what they appeared to be built on. Marcus put the receipt down on the table beside his father's note and the co-signature document and the letter of recommendation and the mortgage refinancing agreement, the documents of 30 years laid out on a small porch table in the October morning. He looked at his hands. He said, I left you. He said it the way certain true things are said when a person has finally found the accurate word for something they have been describing incorrectly for a long time. Not a question. Not a confession performed for effect, just the sentence that fit. Agnes looked up from her tea. She looked at her son for a long moment with the same expression she had worn all morning, the precise and complete attention of a woman who has been paying attention for 46 years and is still paying it, and she said, You got lost, Marcus. She said, There's a difference. You're here now." Raymond said nothing. He picked up the folder from the table and closed it. He held it on his lap the way he had held it all morning with both hands, with the care of something that had been kept for a long time and had served the purpose it was kept for. He had been in Aspen when his mother's heart stopped working correctly. He had been at a dinner party when Raymond wrote the check that kept her alive. There was no accounting for this, no transaction that settled it, no loan repaid or phone call made that undid the 2 in the morning or the 6 hours in the waiting room or the red stamp on the hospital receipt. There was only the reckoning. And it was sitting on a porch on Clement Street in the October morning finally arrived. They moved inside at noon. Agnes unlocked her front door and went in first, and Marcus followed, and Raymond came last with the folder under his arm, and the house closed around the three of them with the particular quality of a house that has been maintained with care for a long time, the specific warmth and order of a place that has had one consistent inhabitant who understood that a house reflected the person keeping it. Marcus stood in the front room. He looked at the room the way he had looked at the house from the sidewalk, with the expression of someone encountering a place they had made themselves stop seeing and were now seeing again, and the room was the same room it had always been, the same furniture and the same arrangement and the same photographs on the side table and the same light through the window in the afternoon. And above the fireplace, the diploma. He stood in front of it for a long time. The frame was the dark wood one Agnes had bought the week it arrived, still dark, and unscratched the glass, clean the document inside it, undimmed. His full name and the formal typeface of the university, and the degree conferred, and the date and the signatures of the university officials who had been in office that year, and whom he had never known and would never know. Agnes stood in the kitchen doorway watching him. He said, "You kept it up." She said, "Of course I did. You earned it." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "I didn't. Not entirely." Agnes looked at the diploma. She did not offer the reassurance that he had in fact earned it, and that the help he had received did not diminish the earning. She understood that he was not asking for reassurance. He was saying something true, and he needed it to be received as true, and she received it as true. Marcus turned from the diploma. He said, "What do you want from me, Mom?" He said it with the tiredness of a man who has received more information than he can organize and is looking for the instruction that comes at the end of it. He said, "The folder, the receipts, all of it. What do you want me to do with it?" Agnes moved from the kitchen doorway to her chair, the chair she had been sitting in at this particular angle to the room for 30 years, and she sat in it, and she looked at the diploma rather than at Marcus, and she was quiet for a moment in the way of someone choosing their words not for effect, but for accuracy. She said, "I don't want you to do anything with it, Marcus." She said, "I just want you to know what it cost. Not money." She paused. "Time, people, the people who were here when you weren't." Marcus looked at the floor. He said, "And the thing I came for." He looked at Raymond, who had taken the chair near the window and set the folder on the floor beside him. He said, "The call, the contact. Is that still?" Raymond said, "I'll make the call." Marcus looked at him. Raymond said, "I told your father I'd watch over you too. That doesn't expire." Marcus said, "Why?" He said it with the specific bewilderment of a man who has spent the morning having his assumptions dismantled and cannot locate the foundation of the one that remains. He said, "After everything in that folder, after the surgery and the loans and all of it, why would you?" Raymond looked at him with the steady attention he had maintained all morning, the attention of a man who had been a bank manager for 20 years and had made decisions about people's futures on the basis of careful assessment and had not lost the habit. He said, "Because your mother would want me to." He said, "And because your father asked me to." He said, "And because the alternative is watching you fail, and neither of us wants that for you." He said, "You asked me earlier if I knew how things worked." He paused. "This is how things work, Marcus. Not the way you thought they worked. This way." Marcus said, "I don't deserve the help, Raymond." Raymond said no. He said it without softening it. Then he said, "But Agnes deserves a son." And those aren't the same conversation. The room was quiet. Agnes looked at the diploma above the fireplace. Raymond looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at his hands, which were the hands of a man who had arrived on this street 3 hours ago with a specific request, and was leaving with something considerably more complicated and considerably more necessary. The understanding that he had never been alone in the way he had told himself he was alone, that the self-made story had been a story, and that the truth was the folder Raymond had been carrying for 30 years, and the woman who had kept a diploma on the wall through every year of his absence. Raymond said one condition: no financial terms, no interest. One condition. Marcus waited. Raymond said dinner, once a month, in person, not a phone call and not a card. He said a chair and a table and your face across from hers. Marcus looked at his mother. Agnes was already standing. She went to the kitchen without waiting for his answer, and the sound of her moving through it came through the doorway. The particular sounds of a kitchen being put to use, the cabinet opening, and the plates being taken down from the shelf. And Marcus heard 2 plates, and then the sound of a third being added, and he understood that she had already known what he was going to say before he said it. He had come for a lifeline. He was leaving with something more complicated and more necessary than that. Raymond picked up the folder. He held it for a moment, and then he set it on the table beside Agnes's chair where it had always been. He said, "Stay for dinner, Marcus." From the kitchen, Agnes said, "I made enough." She had made enough. She had, it turned out, always made enough. 3 plates on Agnes's table. She had set them while the conversation was still happening on the porch, which was the kind of thing Agnes did, the practical preparation that ran parallel to the emotional, because Agnes had always understood that the body needed feeding regardless of what the heart was working through, and that a meal on the table was its own form of statement about what she believed was going to happen. The street outside the window had gone the color of early evening, the particular orange of October light at 5 o'clock, warm and horizontal, finding the things it touched at a low angle, and making them look the way they looked in memory, rather than in ordinary daylight. Raymond's 2 rocking chairs were empty on the porch facing the street, as they always faced it, waiting with the patience of objects that have been positioned correctly and see no reason to change. They ate. The silence at the table was not the silence of people who have nothing to say or who are avoiding what needs saying. It was the silence of people who have said a great deal and are now in the territory that comes after the quieter territory, where the words settle into their correct positions and the next words have not yet formed themselves. Marcus ate with the attention of a man eating food that is better than what he has been eating, which Agnes noticed without commenting on. After a while, he said, "Mrs. Okafor." He said it as the beginning of a question he was not sure how to finish. Agnes told him about the night at the hospital. She told it the way she told most things, as a sequence of events in their order, the chest pain that had started at 11 and that she had waited on for an hour before deciding it was not going to resolve on its own, the call to Mrs. Okafor at midnight because Mrs. Okafor had said years ago that Agnes should always call her first for anything medical, because Mrs. Okafor had been a home health aide for 30 years and knew the difference between things that could wait and things that could not. She told him about Mrs. Okafor arriving in 7 minutes in her coat over her pajamas and driving with the focused calm of someone who has made this kind of drive before. She told it without blame. She told it as a story, which was what it was now, and Marcus listened to it as a story and heard in it underneath the telling the shape of the night she did not describe, which was the shape of the hours in the waiting room that he had not been in. He said, "I'll call her, Mrs. Okafor." Agnes said she'd like that. Marcus said Raymond's granddaughter, Iris. He said she organized the folder. Raymond said she's a lawyer now, 3rd year at a firm downtown. He said she's the one who went through everything and put it in order. She wanted to understand what her grandfather had been keeping for 30 years. Marcus said she knows everything in it. Raymond said she knows everything I know. Marcus absorbed this. He understood what it meant that there was a young attorney who had read the co-signature and the letter of recommendation and the mortgage refinancing and the hospital receipt and his father's note, who had held all of it and organized it and understood its dimensions. He said, "What did she think?" Raymond said she thought it was the most thorough act of friendship she had ever documented. He paused. "She also thought you should know about it. She was the one who suggested the folder be ready. Agnes said she came to see me last spring. She brought me tomatoes from her garden. We had tea. Marcus looked at his plate. Agnes said Claudette called me 3 weeks ago. Marcus looked up. Agnes said not to apologize, just to ask how I was. She said she had been thinking about it and she wanted to know I was well. She said it mattered to her. Marcus said I didn't know she called. Agnes said I know you didn't. She looked at her plate and then at Marcus. She's not a bad person, Marcus. She followed the current. She said you both did. The table was quiet for a moment. Agnes said currents take you where they take you. The question is whether you know how to swim back. After dinner, Marcus stood in the kitchen doorway while Agnes washed the plates, which she had done after every meal in this kitchen for 40 years, and Raymond sat at the kitchen table with his hands around his cup, in the way he had been sitting in kitchens for as long as anyone on this street could remember. Marcus said, "Can I take the diploma home?" Agnes set a plate in the drying rack. She did not turn around. She said it belongs here. It was earned here. She set the second plate in the rack. She said, "But when you visit next month, you can look at it again." Marcus stood in the doorway and received that sentence and understood everything in it, which was the same thing as understanding everything about the woman who had kept the diploma on the wall through every year he had not come home to see it. At the door, he paused. He looked at Raymond's porch at the 2 chairs facing the street and the small table between them empty, now the folder no longer on it. Raymond said the folder stays open, Marcus. Marcus looked at him. Raymond said I never close a file I'm still working on. He said it with the small, dry quality of a man making the driest possible joke about 30 years of careful documentation, and it was the warmest thing he had said all day, and Marcus looked at him for a moment, and something passed between them that did not require more words. Marcus went down the porch steps. He got in the car with the dented rear panel. He drove away down Clement Street, and Agnes and Raymond stood on the porch and watched him go the way they had stood on this porch and watched many things on this street without hurry, without performance. Agnes went inside and came back with 2 cups. She handed Raymond the green one. They sat. The street had gone from evening orange to the softer gray of early dark, the streetlights finding their level, the houses on Clement Street settling into the night, the way houses settle when the day is finished. Agnes looked at the empty chair. The 3rd chair, the one Marcus had sat in, facing the street between their 2 chairs, still positioned where it had been when he rose to leave. She looked at it with the quiet attention of a woman who has been looking at things on this porch for 22 years and knows how to read what she sees. Raymond said, "Will he be back next month, do you think?" Agnes said yes. Raymond said, "How do you know?" Agnes said, "Because he finally knows what he's coming back to." She drank her tea. The street was quiet. The folder was inside Raymond's house on the shelf where he had put it, still open the way he kept files he was still working on. He came back for help. He found something older than that, the people who had been holding the net beneath him since the beginning, who had never asked for credit and had never required acknowledgement and had simply continued to show up, paying the bills and keeping the chairs positioned and making enough food and carrying the folder from the porch to the house and back to the porch again. The long, patient work of people who understood that love was not an announcement, but a practice daily and unhurried and without end. The porch light was on. It had been on every night for 30 years. Agnes looked at the empty chair, the chair that meant a promise, the chair that would be filled again next month. She was already certain of it.